This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Training, development and education. Again, this is from E1, just very quickly. Training, if you remember, is really instantly needed for your current job. You're probably going to use that tomorrow. Development is much more longer term. It's often associated with the phrase management development. You're a manager. At some point, you're going to have to interview potential candidates. You mightn't be doing it for a year, but at some point you will have to be doing that. And as well to have that sort of skill in your armory, really. Similarly, making presentations, perhaps to clients, is something you might have to do at some point, not too far in the future, even though we can't really put a particular date on it. That tends to be development. And not quite so important, the definition of education is knowledge acquired gradually through learning and instruction. Types of training, again, kind of revision. You can be sent out on a formal course, given lectures for 2 days. You can shadow people, follow your boss around for a month, seeing how he or she operates. Temporary promotion, acting manager, acting supervisor. It's great until that ends and you kind of go back down to where you were. Computer-based training can deliver training on demand, just-in-time training it's sometimes called. Where this syllabus gets a little bit more interested is in mentoring and coaching. So what is a mentor? And very definitely, a mentor is not your line boss. A mentor should not be your line boss. The idea is, I think, that the mentor, we have here in this last phrase which we've got down here, the mentor should be like a friend, a confidant in the organization. Somebody you can go to with certain problems or doubts, speak to them confidentially, knowing that it's not going to end up in your employment record, or it's not going to maybe affect your chances of promotion. You can't really do any of that with your line boss, no matter how sympathetic the line manager is. There's always a thought in the back of your mind that this person will be taking my questions on board. They will remember that. And when it comes maybe to promotion, they will remember, oh, he had to ask me about that, or he had some kind of personal problems I had to deal with. And therefore that would stop you being frank and maybe stop the help coming. So you want somebody who's not your line manager, someone a little bit more senior than you. Could be somebody of the same grade, but probably about a year in front of you. Because what they're helping you through really is it's almost the teething problems. You join a company, it's different people, different rules, maybe you're doing a different job, and it's been quite a lot to learn, quite difficult to find your feet. So this person can give you confidential and kind of trustworthy practical advice, maybe on how to organize your time better. Counseling, what happens if you're not getting on with your colleagues very well, you don't get on with your boss very well, and so on. How should you cope with those sort of tensions? And may also give you guidance on analysing your own performance, so you have a realistic appraisal, or can tell you, this is what you should be doing, this is what you are doing, there's a bit of a gap there, and so on. All of this without it ending up in your employee record and perhaps having an impact later on. Many organisations are beginning to have this idea of mentoring, and it doesn't really cost very much. You're not employing somebody specially to do it. It's maybe maybe it starts off being a half-hour meeting every week or something, but probably then as time goes on, the mentor doesn't need to be quite so hands-on. Coaching is a very valuable form of training. Coaching is sometimes called on-the-job training, or in the workplace training. You're not sent out to somewhere to get lectures, which may not be quite what you need. Basically, you accompany your supervisor, or your supervisor keeps a very close eye on you, and explains what to do, looks at what you've done, maybe suggests better ways of doing it, and you gradually learn on the job. It's the way in which auditors learn their craft. They do learn, obviously, a certain amount of theoretical stuff, but when it actually comes down to doing an audit, There's usually a senior in charge or a supervisor with 2 assistants, and the supervisor will act as a coach for these assistants. Will tell one to go and do the bank reconciliation, show that trainee how to do it, review what they've done, say where they've not done it right, and so on, and provides very memorable training, really, very practical, memorable training on the job. Performance appraisal is very important in organisations, and its aim is twofold. First, to improve organisational performance. Organisations really perform through people, and one of the aims of appraising people is to get better results from the organisation. The other part of appraisal is to help to develop individuals, that they become better, they become maybe more motivated and so on. And if appraisal is done well, it should address and attack both of these requirements. The general aim, apart from improving organisational performance and improving people's performance, they tend to look at 3 elements. First of all, there is the reward, what you're going to be paid next year, and maybe what is your bonus last year. There is your performance from last year, and then there is letting you know your potential, what you might be doing next year, what the company's plans have for you. Now, those are probably the 3 common components of most appraisals. Some experts, however, would say you shouldn't have that one in there. You shouldn't be fixing people's pay at the same time that you are reviewing their performance, because there's more to pay than performance. A company cannot pay more than it can afford, so the economics and its competitive position has a bearing on pay. There is no point in paying really an employee more than they're worth, more than the going rate for that sort of work is. Why would I pay this person, let's say, 15,000 if I could recruit another person at about 10,000? And it's very easy for salaries to kind of get out of line like that. You have somebody employed with you for 5 years, a good worker. Every year you give them an inflationary rise plus a bit more for being a good worker. And by the time you compound up 5 years worth of these pay rises, you can easily find they're kind of being paid 50% above what a new recruit might be being paid. And finally, not all organisations have got complete freedom about pay, because certainly larger organisations, you have a grade, and as long as you're in that grade, you're in a pay band. And unless there's a way of promoting you, it doesn't matter how good you are, once you're up against that ceiling of the pay band, you're kind of stuck. And therefore, these people would say you should keep the reward process like almost about 6 months out of phase with the appraisal of performance and potential, because it doesn't look too good if you praise somebody to the skies, so to speak, saying you're really good at this, and then you say, but there's only an inflationary pay rise this year. It maybe doesn't be quite so convincing. What you need to do to carry out the appraisal interviews, your manager needs to prepare. The manager needs to look back at what was said at last time's appraisal interview. The manager needs to gather information. How have you actually performed during the year? And they have to go out and talk to colleagues and clients and so on to get a feeling about how you've actually performed. Then is the interview, the 3 main types of interview. The manager can tell you what he or she thinks and just sells that to you, just kind of convinces you. It's really a one-way street of communication. A little bit better is tells and listen. So the manager knows what he or she thinks, and tells it to you, but then you can reply and you can say, I don't think that's quite right, and that's not quite fair, and so on. But for both of these, because the manager has kind of made up his or her mind beforehand, they tend to be reluctant to change really their views. It's almost an admission they're wrong. And no matter how much they listen to you, they probably don't alter your assessment very much. Problem solving is supposed to be far better in terms of communication. Problem solving is like you go into your manager, and in front of the manager is nearly a blank sheet of paper. There's a list of headings down the side of various qualities. So one of the headings might be technical ability. So your manager says to you, well, what do you think your technical ability is? Let's mark it from -5, really, really bad, to +5, fantastic. And you say, I think my technical ability is about +3. And the manager was saying, well, I was thinking maybe more +1. Nothing's been written down yet, but because nothing's been written down, then there's a little bit more flexibility, and you can discuss with each other why one of you thinks it's +3 and one of you thinks it's -1 or +1. And it may go up to +3, it may go to 2, it may go to 1, but you've gone through this process of discussing and problem solving what the issues are. Then you have to plan really the future, plan improvements. So if your technical ability is only +1 and your manager wants it up a bit, you have to think how you're going to do that. Maybe it's sending you on a course, maybe it's getting you to practice more with that. You agree what's going to be done, and then it should be summarized in writing. Okay? And in writing would be kind of the basis of a report. The report will be filed in your personnel file, and you should get a copy of it as well. Really as a reminder of what was said, and in particular maybe a reminder about what you've promised to get better at. And also maybe a reminder to the manager, yes, I'm going to send this person on a course, and here's the written evidence that we agreed that. And then there is the follow-up, actually doing it, putting that person on a course, improving, monitoring progress and so on to make sure that the promised achievements, if you like, are actually realized. And this should help both these twin objectives of appraisal to improve organizational performance and also to develop the individual by making it better. Now, not all appraisals go smoothly, and Lockett has suggested 6 ways in which the appraisal process can be less than perfect. And the first one is confrontation, where basically the manager and the subordinate kind of fall out, and they have an argument or certainly a strong disagreement over what's being said. It could be that the manager is kind of taking a kind of tell and sell approach, and the subordinate simply doesn't accept what the manager is saying. And this kind of confrontation here, and emotions rise, and once emotions rise, then you are almost capable of taking good advice on board and coming to an agreement of what should be happening. You're going to leave the appraisal feeling really fed up. It's certainly not developing you. And it's difficult to see how your performance is going to improve to help the organization. Judgment is got kind of overlaps with this. Judgment is where the manager maybe makes accusations against you almost, which are too subjective, saying that you haven't performed very well, but can't really maybe back that up with very much evidence, being very kind of judgmental, and also kind of blaming you a lot for where you didn't do well, and maybe not praising you enough where you did do well. Remember, the objective of an appraisal isn't to just blame people and kind of chastise people, tell people off that they haven't done well. You want a win-win out of it. You may have to tell them you didn't do so well, but it has to be done in quite a kind of supportive way. And really, instead of saying what went well and what went badly, appraisers are taught language like, well, what went well, and then what didn't go so well. So the criticism is it's there, but it's, gentle's the right word, but it's not criticism that's likely to back you into a corner and lead to confrontation. Chat's almost the opposite. Chat is where the manager is reluctant to really pass any judgment at all, or to make any criticism at all. So you have this kind of friendly chat, but nothing useful really comes out of it. Bureaucracy and event are quite closely linked. Bureaucracy is really the form of assessment where the manager is almost obsessed with getting these forms filled in and making sure everything's been signed off. And event is really people doing an appraisal, because we always do them in March every year. And we'll come in, we'll do the appraisal, we don't plan it very much, we don't follow it up very much, but at least we know we've had this year's appraisals, without really thinking what should be coming out of them. And finally, unfinished business. This is where the follow-up on the appraisals, the arranging of courses, the arrangement of the secondment to another department simply don't take place. And this is liable to make employees very cynical indeed about appraisals. Health and safety. Health and safety work is very important. Apart from the moral incentives, there are great financial incentives, because in many countries, if employees get injured at work, then employers have to pay a fantastically high amount in damages. So, employers' duties. All work practices must be safe. So nowadays in the UK, it's almost impossible for it to be regarded as being safe for an employee to go up a ladder. Okay, they can go up a ladder maybe to change a light bulb, but going, much above a couple of meters is now kind of regarded as not being the safe way to be dealing with work at height. And scaffolding might be required. So once you get up to having to paint the windows on the first floor, then maybe it requires scaffolding, because the dangers associated with stretching and falling off a ladder are really quite high. The work environment must be safe and healthy, not too warm, not too cold, not too much dust, not too much noise, not too much pollution, and so on. Plant and equipment must be properly maintained. So in the UK, every few years, every electrical device has to be inspected, every plug and socket has to be inspected, to make sure nothing's kind of come loose inside, which may be an electrocution danger to people using it. We should train people. We have to give instructions, make instructions available to encourage safe working practices. There are many training courses on being safe at work. People have to be told what the policy on safety is. So you would be telling people, if you see anything that looks damaged or dangerous, you have to report it. You'll be telling people you must follow the particular rules and regulations to do with the machinery you're working. You mustn't play pranks on colleagues which may be dangerous. And employers must carry out risk assessments. You have to actually carry out risk assessments for almost everything an employee does, because the idea is until you've at least thought about what the employee does and thought about the risks, you can't be sure there aren't any. It might be that having considered the risks, you decide there are no risks worth bothering about there, and no special training or safety devices are needed, but you have to kind of throw the net very wide to see what could possibly go wrong with this simple task. And then, if nothing can go wrong with it, you can say that on the piece of paper where your risk assessment is actually being carried out and being recorded. Following on with employers' duties, you should share any information you come across with others. So let's say you're two departments, one sees a particular hazard with maybe a process, then they should share that information with another branch or another department which has a similar process. Introduce controls to reduce risk. So you would tell people you mustn't have cables going across the floor. You tell people if you spill a liquid on the floor, you must immediately put up one of the little kind of yellow signs saying cautious wet floor, and so on. You would be insisting that people had fire drills every week or every month or whatever was thought to be required. We should keep safety policies under review, and we should in particular Be on the lookout for staff who are maybe particularly at risk from certain processes and certain types of work. You have to employ competent safety and health advisors where necessary. So if you're in certainly chemical works where there are dangerous chemicals around, you would need professional help to give you advice. If somebody gets splashed with this chemical or happens to ingest it in some way, what is the emergency treatment? Employers, will not know that themselves, so they have to get professional advice on that. And this will be, of course, put into the safety policies and so on, and written instructions to people. There will be a safety representative. This is somebody on the employee's side, could be a trade union person who looks out for the safety of employees there. And there will be a safety committee where both the safety representatives and management meet, and they can discuss maybe issues of safety, maybe how a recent accident happened, how they should progress in the future to make sure everyone's working safely. Now, not all the responsibility is on employers. Employees also have a responsibility. For example, they have to take reasonable care of themselves and others. You're not supposed to do really daft things. If you deliberately go against instructions and safety instructions, then that is actually a breach of discipline, and you could be dismissed for that. Certainly, if it's putting others at risk, it's probably known as gross misconduct. You have to allow employers to carry out their duties, particularly enforcing safety rules or maintaining machinery. So if an employer says you have to stop working this machine because it's not safe, you have to let them in there to fix a thing. You're not allowed to interfere intentionally or recklessly with machinery. So you're not allowed to, say, take guards off the machine. If there's a guard there for safety to stop people getting caught up in a machine, taking that off maybe to help you work faster would be a disciplinary offence. Similarly, the bottom one here, these kind of two in a way kind of come together a little bit, using all equipment properly. For example, I have a friend who runs a printing business, and in the printing business there are large guillotines, big blades which come down and slice paper, really. And obviously there is a danger because when this big blade comes down to somebody whose hand was in there, they could have serious damage. And so the way the machine is set up to bring the blade down, apart from there being guards and so on, but before the blade can come down, the employee has to press two buttons, and they're like arms width apart. So you have to press with both fingers simultaneously. You get about a quarter of a second difference. So you can't go that. It has to be both together. And this means, of course, if you're pressing the buttons, your hand can't be in the machine. But he was saying, what the guys do to, I suppose, speed things up for themselves, is you press one button with a finger, and they kind of press the other, they put the leg up with their foot up, and they press the other button with their foot on the bench, and the hand could still be in there. Now that is not using equipment properly. Those would be, and must be really, disciplinary offences. They have to be brought to somebody's attention, they have to be warned, you keep doing that, you're going to be sacked. Because health and safety is not a trivial issue. Equal opportunities. In the UK, we have equal opportunity laws surrounding race. And when we talk about equal opportunities, we mean recruitment, we mean promotion, we mean pay, we mean given opportunities to go on courses and so on. So you have to be careful not to discriminate between people on the basis of race, or sex, or disability. And in the UK, the requirement is that companies make reasonable adjustments to accommodate people who are disabled. Now, what is a reasonable adjustment? Well, if it was a small company, let's say 4 people employed, and you had some machinery upstairs, and you had maybe the shop or something downstairs, and you're employing someone to work machinery, and somebody comes along in a wheelchair. Now, It's a very small company, 4 people employed. That firm would not be expected to kind of bring all the machinery downstairs, nor would they be expected to install a lift, because that would be, to let the person in the wheelchair go upstairs, because that would be prohibitively expensive. However, if instead of 4 people being employed, there was maybe 100 or 200 people being employed, then a reasonable adjustment would be you will put a lift in the building so that anyone who is in a wheelchair can in fact go up to the first floor where they can work. So it's a fairly elastic definition, if you like, but reasonable adjustments are required. Nor are we allowed to discriminate on the basis of religion or sexual orientation or age. And I think age was probably the last one to be going into the legislation. So if you're thinking of promoting someone, you have someone who's maybe 60 and somebody who's maybe 26, then you can't say, well, I give the promotion to the 26-year-old because this person might be here for 10 years, whereas if I give it to the 60-year-old and they're going to retire when they're 65, they're going to be there for 5 years. We're not allowed to do that. Although, of course, there may be ways round it. Basically, what you can do is you can, maybe formulate the person's specification cleverly and maybe unfairly, but so that the younger person is favoured. If you find you are discriminated against, well, potentially there are 3 sorts of discrimination. Direct discrimination is where you would say something like in an advert, salesman required. Okay. The use of salesman is direct discrimination, and to avoid that you would have to say something like salesperson or sales representative required. It has to be gender neutral. The only times you can directly discriminate is if you're employing someone in your home. So if you wanted someone to look after your children, you could specify a woman. Where there's a genuine requirement for it to be person to be one sex to the other. So if you were a theatre director putting on Romeo and Juliet, you are allowed to insist that Romeo is played by a female performer. And the other main reason is for reasons of dignity and decency. If you're employing someone to work, let's say, to look after elderly people, and all the elderly people were female, then you'll be allowed to insist that care assistants were all female, because it might be uncomfortable to those residents and might not be particularly decent if they had a male nurse or something of that sort looking after the sort of duties that would have to be carried out. Indirect discrimination is where you are liable actually to come across most discrimination, be very subtle. So indirect discrimination will be saying something like, sales representative required must be 2 meters tall with a large black beard. You haven't specified male, but obviously the chances are that this role is going to be much more easy to fulfill if you're male and if you're female. And that's the nature of indirect discrimination, where for one race or one sex, male, female or something, there's going to be more or easier for those candidates to fulfill it. And this can be really quite subtle, and this is where companies get into bother. There was one company, and this was before age discrimination came out, but it wanted to send what you might call its high flyers on a course. And it specified that to go on this course, you have to be a manager and you have to be under 30. And that was held to be discriminatory against women, because most or many women will have had a couple of years out of work, maybe to bring up children for 2 years, maybe until they go to school, or they come back part-time for a little while, and so on. And if you're going to be both a manager and under 30, then it's harder to get those criteria met together if you are a woman. So maybe what they should have said, to go on this course, you must be a manager, and men must be under 30 and maybe women have to be under 33 to make some adjustment for the potential indirect discrimination. Victimization is where someone has taken you to an employment tribunal, and these here would ultimately go to what's called a tribunal, which is a kind of court. So an employee has alleged some sort of discrimination, that they weren't promoted when they should have been, and maybe the tribunal has found for the employee, and they come back to work, and then because of course they've taken you to court and damn it they've won, you get your own back on them by kind of being a bit nasty to them, and that is known as victimization, and that is also a crime. Diversity is kind of very much linked to the idea of no discrimination. And what it means is ensuring that the composition of the workforce reflects the population as a whole. And obviously by not having sex discrimination, not having race discrimination, not having age discrimination, religious discrimination, you should be promoting gradually the idea that the workforce should be kind of representative of the population. And this is thought to be good, obviously, for maybe moral purposes, that it's unfair to exclude certain areas of society from the job, but it can be defended, if you like, or supported on absolutely profit and loss kind of basis here. And it's this second one here: a diverse organisation will better understand and meet the needs of customers. Well, that's certainly one example, but let's go through all of them. So let's say you take me. Assume I'm from obviously a kind of white middle class background, and there are people from very different backgrounds around, from different racial backgrounds, different countries maybe, from different educational backgrounds, from different kind of family backgrounds. And I go and recruit someone, and because I'm a bit prejudiced, I recruit somebody in my own image, like me. Now you have to think, what's the advantages of having two of me with the same skills and outlooks in one business? Would it not be better to have one of me with my particular skills and outlooks, and maybe one of somebody else who adds a bit of variety to that, and maybe actually adds a bit of challenge to some of my ideas? But just getting more of the same is maybe not the best way to recruit. Secondly, you have to bear in mind who your customers are. So let's say I, again, my white middle class background, am trying to sell to people from some sort of minority section of society who's not white middle class. Now, wouldn't they look at me a bit oddly? Here's a company, and maybe I've been just recruiting people like me. Here's a company, all white, trying to sell, all from particular educational kind of backgrounds and social strata, whatever, trying to sell to other people who are really quite different. That's not going to presumably work quite so well. You might sell better to people who felt a kind of affinity with the company. And the third reason why diversification is maybe better, or diversity is maybe better, is it simply widens the pool of talent from which you can recruit. So if you're really not going for diversity at all, and okay, this is illegal because I'm only going to employ men, then you're kind of cutting your potential recruits in half because of not having females. Or if you say, let's take a firm of accountants, they have let's say a very skilled tax manager, let's say a woman. She takes a couple of years off, maybe to have a couple of children. And you say, come back to work, but you have to come back Monday to Friday at 9 to 5. And, there's a big chance that this woman will say, look, I can't do that. It means I have to commute a lot every day. It means that, I have to find, I won't be seeing my children, I'll have to find childminders and so on. I simply won't work. And maybe what we should do to encourage a lot of diversity is to make the employment practices more flexible. Why not say to somebody, well, better part-time than not at all. Why don't you work maybe from 9 to 2 every day? Or why don't you work 3 days a week from home and only have to come into the office 2 days a week? I mean, you're simply widening the net, and rather than kind of cutting out a huge amount of talent which is there, you're kind of saying, well, maybe I could go a lot of the way to recruit back into work these people whom I know are very, very talented. So diversity is big business. The final thing I would say is it's very good PR. It's good public relations for the employer. Other employees see that you seem to be fair and open. Customers see that you are fair and open. And maybe collaborators see that you are fair and open. And it's a kind of maybe the modern way to go that people will feel much more comfortable with.